Welcome to this webinar, Web3, Exploring the Decentralized Future, lectured by Dr. Gavin WOOD. So this webinar is the collaboration between Tokyo College and MBSC 2030. So for those who don't know about MBSC 2030, I'd like to explain a little bit about MBSC 2030 first. So MBSC 2030, or Saudi Center, is the common name for Mohammed bin Salman Center for Future Science and Technology for Saudi Japan Vision 2030 at the University of Tokyo. My name is Kento Mogi. I'm the Deputy Director of the center. So the center is one of the presidential endowed chair supported by MISC Foundation of Saudi Arabia and was established in 2020. So we conduct multiple collaborative research and education activities with various Saudi institutions. And we have 12 affiliate laboratories, which are conducting 15 R&D projects in the various fields, mainly in engineering. And one of the project is just focused on blockchain technology. So today, we would like to welcome Dr. Gavin WOOD, who is leading computer scientist in the field of blockchain and Web3 technology. Dr. Gavin WOOD co-founded Ethereum as a chief technology officer. He then co-founded Parity Technologies, a blockchain development company, and also founded the Web3 Foundation, a Swiss foundation dedicated to building a decentralized web. He is also a creator of Polkadot, an open source protocol that connects different blockchains to enable Web3, and Kusama, Polkadot's experimental network. I have just a little question, Dr. Did you know about Kusama before you developed Polkadot?
Yes, I think I had previously toured around one of her exhibitions prior to at least launching the Kusama blockchain network, but I can't say that it was myself who came up with the name.
Thank you. So the title of this main talk today is why we need decentralized technologies for our future. Before we dig into your lecture, could you please introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Yes, well, thank you for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Gavin. I mean, you've covered many of the important parts of my identity for the purposes of the present. So I helped found Ethereum about 10 years ago now, and I also created Parity, a company, a blockchain company that has done a number of projects. Also the Web3 Foundation. And you know, I came from a although I've been in blockchain now 10 years, I've come from a relatively I'd say broad academic discipline. I went to the University of York studying computer science for about 8 years. I've been a computer programmer for a long time, since I can remember. Since I think I was about 8 or 9 years old when I wrote my first programs, and I've always been interested in game theory, in economics, and in general, what could we say, political science, I suppose. Although I didn't study them specifically academically, I've always had, I would say, relatively well-informed talks with people that were closer to those in those disciplines. And funny fact, before starting on this path in blockchain and decentralization and all of the economic theory that it requires, I made a strategy board game with an old school friend, which of course requires a fairly good grasp of game theory for it to be playable, and I'm told it is well playable. It's certainly something that a discipline that I've been dipping my feet into for some years.
Thank you very much. Okay, I forgot to tell the audience that you have a Q&A button below your screen. And if you have some comments or questions, please use the button and send us anything either in Japanese or in English. So I will pick up some of them and ask the speakers later when we have a Q&A session. Thank you. So then we would like to move on to the main part of the lecture. So first, could you please tell us why decentralized technology will be needed in our future? So let us know what you think about the natures of centralized or decentralized technologies and about the importance of decentralized.
It's quite a question with yeah, there's a lot of nuance here. I don't think we have time to really cover it in much depth, but I look at centralized technologies as the fossil fuel of mass collaboration. Why? Well, since the creation of the various technologies that allow us to communicate with each other, to coordinate and cooperate en masse, I'm thinking the telephone, even the simple mail service, to the internet, of course. We have needed ways to communication is only one thing, as economists sort of talk about. Communication allows certain signaling, but for the signaling to contain economic strength, by which we might say for the signaling to contain meaning, to understand that there may be repercussions from the signaling, or to be confident that there will be particular repercussions from the signaling, then we need something secondary to the communication. Now, society has brought about this the ability to have economically strong signaling or repercussions from communication by virtue of centralization. Now, let's think of an example here. If I send an instruction to my bank to transfer money into somebody else's account, Alice's account, then this is merely a piece of communication without the knowledge or the belief that my bank will take an action and indeed credit Alice's account because of it. Why do I believe this will happen? Why do I believe if I just talk to someone on the street and say, credit Alice's account, please, then nothing will happen? Why do I believe something will happen because I'm telling the bank? Well, because I trust that the bank will do this, will act on my behalf. I have trust. This trust is based on the fact, or one of the ways that the bank is able to do this action on my behalf is because I have given the bank my money, and therefore my bank is able to act on my behalf. And this is a very fundamental element of centralization and trust-based systems. The bank is a centralized entity. Therefore, there is only one of them. Many people utilize the same one. And it is, and this goes hand in hand with the trust that I give to my bank by handing it my money and believing that it will act on my behalf. Now, systems don't have to be built in this way. For example, the internet isn't built in this way. There is not a single company that runs the internet, or at least not yet, by which all communication flows. No, in fact, there are many different companies, many different organizations. And in fact, the early internet looked rather a lot different. It was very academic based series of networks. Of course, the very early internet looked even more different. It was a military-based system. But as time has passed, it has moved from military to academic, to largely academic, to the commercial thing that we see today. But still, it remains somewhat decentralized. It's a very obvious example of a system that provides a service to everybody, that is a homogeneous, largely homogeneous service, and yet is decentralized. Now, why do we believe that, or why should we believe that a decentralized system is better than a centralized system? Why do I believe that a centralized system is more akin to fossil fuels, whereas decentralized system is maybe more akin to, I don't know, solar power or something? Well, it's because centralized systems for mass coordination, cooperation, for attributing economic strength to our communications are based upon something that I do not believe is sustainable. Now, I've already seen examples where placing huge amounts of trust in small power centers of society has resulted in catastrophe. The banking crisis being one of the most recent examples, but by far from the only one. Basically, centralized designing these systems in a centralized manner, it tends to be able to be done relatively quickly, because essentially the designer just pretends that they are the service. How would I be if I am the service? It's a relatively easy proposition to a designer, whereas designing a decentralized service is a much more difficult proposition for a designer, because of course there is no central system that they can place themselves in the position of. Instead, they have to be very creative, and they have to create the rules of a system such that the emergent effect of those rules results in the service that they want to come about. And this is a very, very difficult thing. It makes designers have to be games creators, has to be a game creator. But by building services in this way, we can create services that are much more resilient against the environment. And what this means is that they're not, that in the case of particular set of actors becoming incompetent or corrupt, or just environmental circumstances conspiring against the system, it means that we can create systems that fail gracefully, that degrade gracefully, or that continue to operate regardless. And this is really what we need if we are to build systems that are they're going to take us into the future, that are going to sustain humanity for decades or centuries to come.
Okay, thank you. Then we would like to move on to the next topic. Could you please tell us, what do trust and truth actually mean in our society?
Yeah. So there are two words. They've come about, that they're used quite a lot in certainly if we look to the West and the Western media, they're used almost interchangeably, which I fear is unfortunate, because they mean two very different things. We hear of the post-truth society, when in fact what people really mean is the post-trust society. We have certainly of the last 10 or 15 years have come to at least in the West, and I think also since COVID, not just in the West, have come to be not so trustful of others, and particularly the power centers, by which I mean government and media primarily, in society. Okay, so let's look at the two words. What do they mean? Well, truth is a relatively easy word. Let's start with that. Truth means an accurate representation of the world. So if I communicate the truth, it means I communicate an accurate a description or representation of what it really is. Now, of course, truth has an important requirement. It's based on an important sort of axiom, which is that there is an objective, a universal truth, a universal reality that we can draw from, and therefore create an accurate representation of. If we do not believe in a universal reality, then there is no single truth. There could be different truths depending on what your reality is. But I think, at least in the learned world, we do believe in a single objective reality, and therefore we might consider the pursuit of science to be to find the truth, right? Learned pursuits, I would say, in general, are pursuits for the truth of the world. So let's move to trust. What does trust mean? Well, trust is a very different thing. Trust is the quality that I place in another person or an organization, or perhaps even a principle where my assumption is that something that they will act in a certain way, that they will behave in a certain way, and generally that way is a way that is beneficial or benevolent towards me, the person who is placing the truth in this thing. So I might trust a bank. What does this mean? Well, it means I trust that a bank will keep my money safe, and when I want it, that they will give it back to me, and when I tell them to do something with it, that they will do that thing with it. I might trust a bank without being a client of the bank, in which case I just trust that it will behave in the way that I expect it to behave. But I would also trust, when I say if I trust a person with my life, then it sort of means that I not specifically trust them to behave in a certain way necessarily, but that I trust them to behave perhaps to my benevolence. In my such that it does not work against me. So trust and truth are very different, but oftentimes they are this. We can achieve the same thing by selecting one or the other. I would say that they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. So, for example, we might look at something like religion. We might look at something like a bank, and we might say, well, these are very trust-based concepts. If I trust a religion, it means, well, I have faith in the religion, right? There is no evidence particularly that I can go towards and to make me believe that the religion is true. No, I trust, and indeed many people do. And on the other hand, something like, for example, science, mathematics, economics, are based much more about observation and learned discourse in order to tease apart what it is that we see the world and come up with a series of rules that we don't just trust, but we have reason to trust, that hold up to a logical, rational inspection. And in doing so, we can try to construct something that approximates the truth. Now, sometimes, as I say, we can achieve certain things using either something that is bound to trusting an individual or an organization versus something that is bound to trusting ourselves with our ability to find the truth. An example, a very simple example, might be climbing a mountain. If you're on the side of a rock face and you want to get up the mountain, you might do one of two things. You might trust that somebody who perhaps is at the top of the rock face and throws a rope down to you, you might trust them with your life and hold onto the rope and kind of hope that they pull you up. Or alternatively, you might carry climbing equipment, rock hammers and ropes and things that you put into the side of the mountain, and your own hands and the sort of funny chalk stuff that you put on your fingers. You might trust in your equipment yourself. Well, you would trust in your equipment, but you probably have checked your equipment beforehand. So you might see to get closer to the point where you don't have to trust another person specifically in order to get up to the top of the rock face and get to where you want to go. In one case, there's a very obvious trust relationship with a person. In the other, the trust, any trust that you need to do is much more optional and decentralized, in that you could have chosen many different types of chalk. You could choose how much chalk to put on your fingers. You could choose many different types of shoes. You can look at the rock yourself and work out your path. Whereas if it's a person with a rope, it's either that person or nothing. It's either that rope or nothing. You don't get to you don't get the choice. And this is really the choice that we face as we move into the next iteration of the internet.
Thank you very much. So 2024 is a memorable year for Web3, as it has been 10 years since your article was published, which defines Web3. And what think about these past 10 years to Web3?
It's been an interesting ride, some ups and some downs. Yes, I wrote the article on Web3 several weeks into working on the Ethereum project. And it became clear to me that Ethereum, while an important piece of the puzzle, as we say, it was not the only thing required for a solution to create a decentralized, massively multi-user application platform, by which we commonly know the web to be. So yeah, in the 10 years, I mean, I would say that we have made some progress. I would say much less progress than I would have expected if you'd have asked me in the 17th of April 2014. I think it still remains an important vision to work towards, and to a large extent, something that hasn't really, 10 years hasn't really changed. I mean, I read it not today, but I've read it in the last few weeks. And I think it's still a pretty reasonable sort of document, a pretty reasonable proposal. I don't think that 10 years has really altered how I think about what Web3 should be. That said, I think that unfortunately names have a lifetime, and what Web3 may come to mean is, in fact, NFTs and Bored Apes and things, rather than what is in the manifesto. But you know, perhaps we go back to the original Web 3.0 name. I don't know.
Okay. So also, I think 2024 is very important for you, Dr. Wood. And it has been 10 years since you met Vitalik and published a paper called Ethereum Yellow Paper, which defined the formal specification for Ethereum. And afterwards, you have been along with the development of Polkadot since then. So could you talk us, please, through your journey, started with Ethereum Yellow Paper, and how you started the Polkadot project as its recent development?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, the yellow paper was I think I wrote the yellow paper or published it around the same time as the Web3 definition document. April 2014, if memory serves. It came about for a very, I would say, good cause. Three different people, all very good programmers in their own right, if I say so myself. Me, Jeff, and Vitalik, each writing an implementation, an independent implementation of Ethereum, found that the original white paper was a little didn't have perhaps the either clarity or lack of ambiguity that would allow us to create each independently create an implementation that was compatible. And so the yellow paper came about from my notes shared with Jeff and Vitalik over clarifications and specifications needed in order to make sure that each of our software implementations were compatible. So I started writing this sort of this set of notes and to clarify various points of incompatibility. And before long, those notes were quite long. And I thought, and they were very formal because, you know, they need to be in order to be unambiguous. And so it seemed reasonable to add a little bit of text around them and create a formal specification. And so that's where the yellow paper came from. And it actually didn't take very long. I think I was done within 2 or 3 weeks. And it's notable as it is the first, to my knowledge at least, formal specification of a decentralized blockchain protocol. It's the yellow paper because the white paper was already taken. Vitalik had written that, and so but it needed to be a color that you could see text on, and so blue was probably going to be too dark, and also it wasn't very diagrammatic, so it felt wrong to call it like a blueprint. So yes, yellow seemed to be the most obvious color. And it's I think I look back at it in the last week or two, and I'm still quite happy with it. It's I'd say it's still quite a pleasing document to look at. And of course, I have Donald Knuth to thank for that mostly. It's with tech and LaTeX being as awesome as they are. But yeah, it's nice to see that it is, to a large extent, managed 10 years. And it's been, I mean, I haven't updated it myself. I know other people have updated it up until a point. I see that this most recent version actually was published only a few days ago, the 12th of January this year. And I see it's also gotten a lot bigger than it was. I think it was under 20 pages when I first published it. It's now 41 or something. But yeah, it's I think formal specifications of this sort give a lot more openness and transparency to a project. And it's unfortunate with well, the Polkadot has a paper that's written in this 2-column LaTeX sort of academic format, but it doesn't contain a formal specification in the same way that Ethereum had. And a large reason for this is because at the time that it was published, a formal specification didn't exist. The protocol itself didn't exist, and it actually had to be researched more thoroughly, which is something that has happened over the last 4 or 5 years to get us finally into the point where we actually could, if we needed to, if we wanted to, write a formal specification. And I think I think this is I think there are good arguments for writing formal specifications. And in my mind, other than having something that is a very pretty, but also strict and accessible in some sense, in that you only need to know some basic mathematics and set theory in order to understand it in principle. It's nice. It's really nice to have, but I think also it's good to have it in order to ensure that a single implementation does not need to necessarily be the only viable implementation. And this is something that decentralized systems are something of it's an Achilles heel of a decentralized system. While the protocol itself may be decentralized, if there is only a single software team that control that protocol or that implement that protocol, and if it's difficult, if not, if it's unpractical or unreasonable for another team to be able to implement the protocol in as canonical a fashion, then there is still a fairly substantial amount of centralization around the protocol, and this can be a problem. So I think for this reason, Polkadot has what's called the Polkadot Fellowship, which aims to promote the knowledge of the protocol beyond the team that happens to develop the most predominant implementation of the protocol. But I think with a yellow paper or something like the yellow paper, a formal specification, this is also a very important cornerstone in a decentralized protocol.
Okay, thank you very much. And we also heard that Web3 Foundation and Parity Technologies have also made several academic contributions. Could you please give us the details about your academic contributions?
Absolutely, yeah. So there have been a number of academic collaborations, mainly taken on by the Web3 Foundation. So the Web3 Foundation has a fairly active research team, and we've seen that they've sort of collaborated within with academic institutions around the world, but in particular in Switzerland, close to where the foundation has its office. And we've seen that the foundation has produced various academic research grade publications. Most recent one being an interesting study into how certain voting systems work in real life when real economic value is at stake. As we often see that even maybe some of the more modern voting systems don't always get well tested in large scale environments where a lot of economic value is at stake. I mean, if we look at voting systems where say the most is at stake, country voting systems on that govern countries, we see that the systems tend to be extremely simple things and extremely long-lived sort of things, dating at least in some cases back centuries. And yet we have good reason to believe that more modern voting systems can provide better outcomes, but they tend not to be tried because they're considered too risky a lot of the time. So I think doing these large-scale experiments where real value is at stake is an important contribution to understanding better how these more modern systems actually behave in real life. Another way that we've been contributing into the academic world is a program called the Polkadot Blockchain Academy. There it is. It's so this came, the idea sort of was one that was born of wanting to sort of give something back into the academic world, but also to create a program that was specifically tailored towards the sorts of concepts that are required when one is creating decentralized systems. Now, as I mentioned earlier, creating and designing a decentralized system is hard. right? When we design a centralized system, whether it's a system of a protocol within government or a piece of software, it's an easier ride because we can place ourselves in the God position, right? As the system that runs everything. And therefore we have something to identify with. When we are designing decentralized systems, we don't get that luxury, and we have to attempt to create sets of rules that give the correct emergent effect. Now, there's a lot of we have tools that help us do this. One of these tools is cryptography. Another tool is game theory. It's rare to see cryptography and game theory taught together. They're relatively distinct disciplines. Now, if you go to a good computer science, a good university to study computer science, there's a chance that you'll be able to take on 2 modules. But oftentimes there won't be any sort of coordination or integration of the two. And if we say that we also want to learn, mechanisms of protocol design and programming, then it's very rare for all of these things to interact. And then if we want to understand governance designs and so forth, then it quickly becomes something that is a very niche combination of disciplines. And this is what the PBA was designed to bring. So what we wanted to do was to teach certain areas of certain disciplines to a graduate grade, but to combine them as well in a way that made it a very useful combination for creating, designing decentralized systems. And on top of that, we wanted to make sure that the students understood why they were doing it this way. That it wasn't just, this is the next big hype thing. It's about blockchain and smart contracts and blah, 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 blah. No, there are reasons that we are doing it in this way because we are able to make more resilient, longer lasting systems that can withstand the greater environmental pressures that we fear that society may come under in the coming years. Why do we believe this? Well, we believe it because if we look at, for example, the history of economics, we see a clear indication that decentralization results in more robust, more resilient systems of cooperation, collaboration. And there is no great reason to believe that centralized systems, in fact, there's every reason to believe that centralized systems are less resilient, even if we go into the nature of, for example, politics. A system of a kingdom with a single leader or an empire with a single leader that might go mad or abdicate or whatever. This is clearly a less ultimately resilient framework than one that is involves multiple individuals sort of coming to a more coherent and decided way of moving forward. So yeah, the PBA we've done the nature of the PBA is such that it's a 5 or 6 week course that we teach in collaboration with an academic partner. So we've taught it at a few different places now. We started in 2021 with Cambridge University. And we've seen we've also been at the University of California in Berkeley, University of Buenos Aires. Actually, I think Cambridge University was 2022 because 2023 was Buenos Aires and Berkeley. And this year we're coming. We're actually teaching at the Hong Kong Polytechnic and the University of Singapore in May. So we're aiming to do 2 or 3 courses each year, each one about, as I say, 5 or 6 weeks. And they're very intense courses. Students don't have much time to do anything other than study. But so far, at least, we've seen really good outcomes from the courses, and we've generally had good reviews from the students. Hard but rewarding, I think, is the general.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So before entering the Q&A time, I would like to introduce our excellent commentator, Professor Kenichi Ueda. So Professor Ueda is a professor at the Graduate School of Economics and Graduate School of Public Policy. And he's also the director of the Center for Advanced Research and Finance, the University of Tokyo. So Professor Ueda, we would be more than happy to receive your comments, please.
Thank you very much for very nice introduction of me, and also thank you very much for having to come in Tokyo.
Thank you.
And well, I just wanna share on screen. Okay. So again, I'm on economics side, not really a technology person, but happen to be studying a lot on money, banking, and digital currency recently, those issues. At the same time, I really love history of economics, as I really kind of felt like you, Gavin, study a lot on economics too, I think. So I just, especially on the decentralization versus centralization, one of the very key issue of economics throughout the history of economics. Actually, have here, you see, maybe not. This is Adam Smith's book, published in 1776. Of course, this book is much new, but originally published in 1776, The Wealth of Nations. He's considered to be a founder of economics. And with this book, we believe economics was born. So already in this book, we know the key, most important thing in our economics of society, how to deal with in business, as invisible hand of a decentralized free market. That works well. That's the key message. And then indeed, it's already here. You see in a quote, I just copied it. By passing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. Meaning that each guy with free will in a free market in decentralized way, they just do whatever you want. But in the end, we know everything is totally fine as a society. And this idea is inside this book. And eventually, after World War II, economics become much more using more mathematics, more logic, more defined. And then indeed, 50s and 60s and a little bit in the early 70s, economics as economic science established and actually mathematically proved, we have to say, this is as a truth. In a sense, it's we now call fundamental theorems of welfare, meaning decentralized market works well. The result is a socially optimal. That's it. Okay. And with some conditions, of course, which we can talk maybe if I have time. And then there's another way, however, somehow in the proof, how the proof works is that suppose I'm a god, as you mentioned something like you're a god, you're writing a program code for centralized system. Indeed, in economics the same. How to prove this theorem is that suppose I'm a god, suppose I allocate perfectly socially optimal. Then we consider a decentralized way of allocation of goods, those things. Then turns out it is the same. That's a way of proving why the decentralized market works well, and in the end equal to socially optimal as a goods allocation. But then people claim, especially, you know, for is 50s, it's Soviet Union, China, these guys claim, well then, you know, Stalin, Mao, those guys think they are the god, so they can do the same. Why we have to rely on the market? We can do the same as a god, right, in a sense. So that's where I have another guy called Friedrich Hayek. It's 1944 book. Well, actually, this is a new book, obviously, but it's originally published in 1944. So saying this is the road of serfdom. Well, he's obviously not obvious, but was Germany first, and then because of, you know, the time, the Nazis time, fled to London. He's a professor at London School of Economics when he wrote this. Before he was in Austria and Österreich, when, you know, the Nazis came. But anyway, so he mentioned actually very important to have a decentralized way of doing economic activities, because if we live on government planned system, government provide your food, government provide your money, government provide your clothes, everything, then we cannot say no to the government or dictator, right? That is called the road to serfdom, slavery in the sense, right?
Yes.
So the decentralized market is really important, not just because allocation of the goods is the same as social optimum, but because that's secure our freedom and democracy. That's really an important concept compared to centralized system, decentralized system. And then Hayek is also known in the next year wrote the use of knowledge in society. And this paper is published in American Review. And by the way, Hayek, because of these two big contributions, won a Nobel Prize in economics in 1974, by the way. So that this 1945 paper, he actually figured out where actually the communism or planned economy or Nazism or National Socialism in English doesn't work. Why? Because, at least at that time, 40s, 30s, because he wrote in this way. He questioned, how can we allocate goods optimally in our society by dictator, by one government, or in a planned society? So how can we do it if I'm a dictator? I can do it if I possess all the relevant information of the people, all the preference of people, complete knowledge of who have what kind of budget, what this guy likes what, and then what's the history of his guy's activity and what's the identity. And if I know everything, I can manage to allocate goods perfectly as a god. However, at least 30s, 40s, 50s, government or dictator should do not have that power. So the information is totally scattered, decentralized. Then only way is achieving the best allocation of the goods and among the people is to have to be based on a decentralized free market way, because each guy knows what I want. And then exchange goods through the market in a decentralized. That's the only way we can go. Stalin cannot do it, Mao cannot do it, Communist Party cannot do it, Nazis cannot do it. That's the result. And this is very strong paper, one of the best known economics paper. Again, won the Nobel Prize. So this is the way we are in most likely until 2000 or 2010. So I believe very interesting of your talk, because as you said, now looks like the opposite, right? Perhaps Chinese government can know everyone's identity, everyone's preference, could allocate goods just based on the planned economy, based on their own, renminbi, which they now have a CBDC and distributing each people anyway. So that is a little bit different from the world that Hayek observed in the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And of course, we know up to probably 2000, I can still believe in Hayek. But now, here's the question. Now, looks like if a dictator can maybe actually can obtain lots of information, can do whatever they want. That's really a problem. So, but again, why problem? Because allocation-wise, maybe those dictators can allocate the goods the same way as a decentralized. It could be optimal. But again, going back to the original road to serfdom question, if a dictator can do it, every people become a slavery of that guy. So we don't want to have that society, obviously not. So that's then important to have a decentralized, even in this digitized world, we do need some decentralized way of having economic transactions, way of having all the relevant information exchanges. That's, I think, something I believe what Gavin tried to establish 10 years, wrote in your paper 10 years ago, and currently doing now. And I believe many people try to do it. Economists obviously, like free market economists like me, and many live in our world, US, UK, Europe, Japan, definitely yes. And that's also technology, I believe, should go, and I hope Gavin will find out more way to go. And of course, it's not just a government issue. Now we know, for example, 10 years ago, we had a trouble in a so-called global financial crisis, 2008 to 9. That was everyone concerned a very big bank. We call too big to fail bank problem. And now many financial service regulators concern now is that behind the big bank or even smaller bank, almost all the bank's information now at the AWS, Amazon cloud computing service, and also Microsoft ones and Google ones, that's really maybe more than 50%, 60% in the worldwide market share, I believe. So it's really those informations are concentrated in the big guide. Maybe it's not the government, but still we are concerned about those kind of stuff too. So again, in this environment, we do also want to have more decentralized way of managing information. That's better, definitely. Resilience, of course. Well, technology side, Gavin knows much better than them, but from my perspective, it's also, we have to have those decentralized systems for us, for people to have more freedom and better democratic world, I believe. That's my sense. And then this is like my prepared ones, and I just comment on a little bit the detail on Gavin's talk today, a little bit more. As I said, on something like trust and truth, that reminds me of a debate of currency crisis research in economics. In the currency, Latin America, Argentina, Mexico, Zimbabwe in the south, lots of those, not lots, but several countries have been experiencing currency crisis. That's a sudden, people suddenly lose the trust on that money in a sense. But what's the best way to run the central bank has been actually researched a lot in economics, obviously. So essentially two things. One is kind of ad hoc way that we need to appoint very good person on the top so that we can believe this guy is good. Other way is that we have to, the central bank should have a very clear, transparent mandate we call inflation target. And the way to achieve it, we call the monetary policy rules. That rule and target, the goal must be totally transparent. Everyone can observe and see, so that we can kind of monitor them to manage well that policy. And then on that, most of the advanced country central bank is working. So kind of Japan is kind of strange, because if we see if the governor changes, suddenly our exchange rate changes. That's actually a little bit in a trust-based system, but we do like less trust on the people system, but we should have more rule-based, you said truth kind of based on. That's why I see rule-based more than trust on person-based. That's actually better indeed. And then going back to one thing, the fundamental self-welfare, why the decentralized way of exchange. The one condition that this decentralized way of exchange can achieve the socially optimal allocation is we have to have one condition which have a securities or some kind of financial contracts of contingent on many different conditions have to be available. And that's a condition for that fundamental sort of welfare that the decentralized market allocates good. But compared to Bitcoin and Ethereum smart contract, that's a really big difference, right? Bitcoin is just there's no payment condition or anything, but the smart contract mostly based on Ethereum. Actually, for us, it's a great. Finally, the economic theory meet the reality, actually, and we are very excited. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now we know that Professor Ueda is a big supporter of Gavin. So do you have any reverse comments to Professor Ueda?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you were talking a little about the Hayek, yes.
This guy.
Indeed, and his the idea of there being a centralized allocator of resources. I mean, I think resilience is a very important argument against centralization. I mean, centralized systems are simply not resilient long term. But I think, I think if we put this argument aside for the moment, we may end up with, to play the devil's advocate, people saying, well, look, so technology has changed, there's so much more communication, there's so much more surveillance. Maybe it is possible for a government to have enough information to be able to make the optimal decision. So I think we need to understand that this is premised on more than simply there being a lot of surveillance, because otherwise we may end up accidentally making an argument for surveillance and tyranny. So I think crucially there are three things that we need to understand. The first one is that, yes, a centralized actor that would fulfill this God role must have total knowledge of everything. And this is not merely something that can be surveilled, but also the understanding of the world, the experience of the world that exists only at the nodes. For example, in the Soviet Union, I think in the 50s or 60s, there was a guy, Lyshenko. Now this guy was the chief. He became the chief agricultural scientist of the Soviet government, and he disregarded modern scientific thought on genetics, and instead put forward, or rather stood behind a discredited theory of where the environment could be used, or environmental factors could be used to change or alter the nature of a crop or of an animal even. And I mean, obviously this is nonsense now, but then, particularly when you have a very centralized system where there's a single person who basically gets to dictate reality, it can be a big problem. And indeed, it was a problem. Farmers who actually understood their environment, their domain, had generations of experience, not to mention their own, were being told to stop doing what they knew was to be the best way of doing things, and instead obey Lyshenko's nonsense theory, and of course, famine came about. This is what we mean to say. This first thing that is needed by some some God actor would be essentially the amalgamated understanding of humanity, not just be able to see the world through everybody's eyes, but also be able to understand the world from everybody's eyes. The second thing is the ability to process and decide and put into effect those decisions at the level of society. Right, so it's all very well knowing, having all of the information. It's quite a different thing to know what to do with it, and given that, it's quite a still different thing to be able to execute on that. One might understand, well, I know that it will most certainly be raining over here and sunny over there, but knowing that therefore one should, plant things over where it's sunny and instead move people after when where it's raining becomes sunny. This is a course of action. Being able to execute that course of action is a different thing as well. The third and final thing is that we must believe that the entity that has this godlike ability, the omniscience and the omnipotence, is benevolent. Right?
Yes.
And these are the three crucial elements of God, right?
Yeah.
Omniscience,
Indeed.
omnipotence, and benevolence. And if you don't have all three, then it doesn't really matter. Like
That's very difficult to have. Most of the cases we don't.
I don't think we have yet a system that has all three.
I see a point that even though you think centralized system is pretty better to design compared to before, however, still we are not, technology is not really reached yet. We have a goal in a sense.
No.
I think, I totally agree. And on top of it, I would also, in Adam Smith, since Adam Smith would say, we also want to emphasize importance of competition and innovation, and also decentralized system compared to centralized system. We have a competition so that the bad kind of services, goods are automatically going out of the market. So the only good things remain. So something bad idea, like Soviet guys' idea, wouldn't survive in the market, right? And also innovation incentive. Of course, if we, ban all the cryptocurrency that happens in China, no longer innovation happens on the cryptocurrency side, right? Only people have to use this CBDC, for example. So the same thing happened. We know everything in our country. The telephone company has been owned by the government until the 1980s. Telephone never be innovated for 40-50 years before we privatize the telephone company, right? The same thing. So innovation do need a decentralized incentive for people's incentive to innovate too. So it's not just allocation, actually.
Yeah, this is very, very true. I mean, indeed, the commercial pressures force innovation, and nowhere, we have a saying, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, right? And it's a company needs to survive, and therefore must continue to invent in order to survive. And we see that when a company no longer needs to innovate, or no longer sort of, when the environment means a company no longer has great need of survival because it is guaranteed, for example, too big to fail, right? Where their survival is guaranteed by society, by the government, then we see a distinct lack of innovation because there is no longer this drive. And I think, nowhere is this more obvious than the banking system, which has barely innovated over centuries.
Okay, thank you very much for a great discussion. And but we have a lot of
Q&A. I see in the Zoom.
So unfortunately, I cannot pick up every one of that, but. So I would like to pick up some of the questions, okay? So there's a question, for example, currently Ethereum is the leading smart contract platform, but I think this situation is rather centralized. And what are some possible ways to make smart contract platforms decentralized without reducing the utility of users? Could you also tell us what are trends are for 2024 as well?
I mean, this is something that within Polkadot that I've at least tried to sort of think others as well. I mean, of course, firstly, the question presumes that it is indeed centralized, and I probably would agree with that. But I think one could make arguments that it's centralized in different ways. And I'm sure there are people out there that would make an argument that it is, in fact, perfectly well decentralized. One of the ways that I think is that it's clearly centralized is in its governance. And it's the means by which decisions on how the protocol will evolve are made. It happens in a relatively opaque manner. Some might say arbitrary, at least in my experience. And this, I think, is something where we can make more progress. One of the sort of ways that Polkadot has been trying to push forward in that regard. I mentioned it before, the Polkadot Fellowship. So essentially trying to turn it from a relatively opaque decision-making process into something that has a little bit more rigor, is more tractable, is more open, and allows it to be clear to perhaps people that are not directly involved in the process how a decision was taken. And I think you know, with Ethereum, I've compared it in the past to the papal model. So this idea that there's like a pope, and although the pope is notionally, you know, the same as everyone else, first among equals, right? There is still such a large amount of influence wielded by this figure that even though everyone may be in principle equals, the actual decision-making process is so dramatically biased towards this individual that it can't really be considered a decentralized process. And one just has to hope in the benevolence of this Pope figure, because otherwise it will suffer from the same sort of fate as typically centralized systems.
Yeah, that's economics the same. We do know that decentralized market economy is needed, but again, even a stock market, Tokyo Stock Exchange, London Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange, we do have a centralized way of rule of how to transact each other. Obviously, whenever you play a poker or mahjong or whatever you game, we need a game of a rule have to be one actually to play the game. So that portion we still need, but we don't call it centralization. We just know we need at least to standardized one rule needed, and the rule have to be, of course, improved. That improvement usually specialists have some more knowledge on better knowledge on the rule, so that we have to rely on those guys on the rule. But of course, always have to be have to face the people's any objections. You have to be transparent. But the rule have to be still. We need a rule actually. Rule of the game is still needed to play the game.
So I think this is right, and I think sometimes it is the idea that there is a unification is confused with centralization.
Yep.
They are two different things. Now, I think there is value in a certain amount of disparity, in that it's reasonable to try many games, or to have a game in which many different games can be tried. There is good reason, or an argument to be made for trying many different games, because otherwise one again gets stuck, and there is a lack of innovation and all the rest of all the problems that. Now, of course, how do we know when we should try to push more into unity versus disparity? Well, generally when there is less opinionation. If we believe that we are approaching something that is more like a universal constant, a fact of nature, then it's reasonable to unify. If we believe that there is a particular individual or historical reason, a particular individual that's maybe put a lot of their opinionation into a system, or a historical circumstance that has resulted in the system, then we might look more towards disparity and variety, simply because there is less of a reason to believe that this is the best set of rules, the best game to be delivering whatever it is that the service that it is that we want.
Thank you very much. So the next question is a little bit more practical. So how can Web3 technologies transform the traditional banking industry?
Well, the traditional, I mean, this is very difficult because people who know a lot about Web3 technologies tend to know not all that much about banking, and people who know a lot about banking don't know a lot much about Web3. Yeah, I think from my side, I think this is really about a greater degree of self-sovereignty over value, over money, essentially. Banks represent essentially the antithesis of self-sovereignty over money. The idea with a banking, so a country like Sweden, for example, where it's almost impossible to pay or indeed conduct oneself in society without having a bank, represents really quite far, I would say, quite close to a totalitarian system that we might more look towards, a communist country. Now, what we have at least in the Western world is maybe a little bit more decentralized or self-sovereign in that one can choose one's bank, but by and large, the choice is not wide, and the options are all pretty similar to themselves. And then we were brought to the question: is a two-party state that much better than a one-party state? And not especially obvious.
Well, it's not really a Web3, but it's already banking business, especially in the payment side of the business, already eroded. Competition already came from the peer-to-peer, money transfer system, and also crowdfunding system and so on. It's already here. The question, of course, is more those services are more equipped with better blockchain system, better decentralized system is still a kind of being developed, I believe. But it's a kind of already we see so-called fintech guys in the past 10 years, 20 years. Already we see banking business has been actually shrinking already.
Okay. Thank you very much. So the next question is a little bit more technical. And so recently there has been an upsurge in approaches using layer 2 and zero knowledge proofs with respect to scalability issues. So these attempts seem to be slightly different from Polkadot's approach, and to be frank, competing even with it. So it would be very interesting hearing Dr. Gavin Wood's views on so-called layer 2 and zero knowledge proofs.
Yeah, so I think zero knowledge proof technology is has quite a lot to provide. I think I would say it's mostly in the nature of its privacy preserving qualities that it's that we can benefit from it most at the moment. And indeed, one of the up and coming pieces of technology that will make its way into Polkadot is reliant on zero knowledge technology. But for scaling, I would largely agree that Polkadot is taking a different direction, and one that is not reliant upon zero knowledge technology at its heart. This is for a couple of reasons. One of them is that I don't think the technology is there yet to be able to decentralize, to be able to keep the amount of decentralization that we want to achieve in place. The premise of using zero knowledge proofs for scalability essentially is at odds with the premise of allowing essentially anybody to contribute to the upkeep and maintenance of a network. Now, it might be that there are reasonable arguments to be made to allow there to be a set of almost anointed centralized parties that have the resources and capabilities in order to create the zero knowledge proofs of correctness. But my feeling is that we should be a little bit more cautious before doing that. In particular, there should be certain thresholds of entry into this position before, or certain thresholds must be lowered sufficiently before we build a system that is totally reliant on them. Now, it may very well be that in 5 years' time, technology is such that people using a laptop can produce proofs that will help effectively contribute to the network progressing. In which case, my argument would be less important. And I think in that regard, I'd say that Polkadot should move towards supporting that, and indeed work is already underway for doing that. But if we're talking about present day technology, I don't think we're there yet. Now, zero knowledge proofs are still premised on there being essentially a means of collaborative interaction between elements that have whose progression has been proven. And so realistically, there will still need to be some form of non-proven computation which is actually reprocessed in a redundant fashion, even if it's just the computation that checks the proofs, even if it's just the case that, yes, everyone on the network actually does run this computation to check the proofs. And so realistically, I would say that the zero knowledge proof system is actually a means of computation magnification rather than anything that would fundamentally remove the need for a computation resource, a computation resource by its very nature. Furthermore, reliance on zero knowledge proofs doesn't solve the problem of availability and the need that for people to be able to inspect information that had brought about the present state, or indeed gather together information that would allow them to push to bring about a new state. This information needs to exist somewhere, and so in reality, there will need to be a system beyond a factory of zero knowledge proofs. And we're already seeing that this, a certain a set of third parties attempting to provide competing systems for, as we say, distributed availability come into place. I think at the moment there is still a very big argument for having a coherent and unified Web3 machine of the sort that Polkadot is trying to present.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we have to go to the last question, probably. So thinking of singularity advent in the near future, such as so-called future strong AI, what do you think of the importance of decentralization?
Yeah, astoundingly important. I mean, AI is a fundamentally centralizing force, perhaps the most powerful centralizing force we've seen in centuries. It's it provides so much power to the very small group of individuals that can manage to collect enough information that and indeed GPUs to process that information, that it's a very I would say it's like almost like an anti-democratic force. It's like while I wasn't so bothered about its advent 6 months ago when I attempted a conversation with a chatbot and realized that it was pretty dumb. Having done some programming recently and a bit of writing recently, I've realized that in that this has the distinct ability to alter how it is that we as individuals interact with each other. In essence, writing, I don't know if you've tried writing with an AI, but writing with an AI is like writing with a know-it-all that's constantly trying to put words in your mouth. And about 30% of the time, they're the right words. So it's actually worth kind of keeping them there. But maybe another 30% of the time, it's just total madness. And 40% of the time, it's kind of a dumb interpretation of what it is that you might want to say, but definitely don't want to say. Now, my fear is that we will, as AI becomes more prevalent, and as the pressures of society become ever greater, at the moment, I as a person, and I presume other people as well, I'm only taking this first 30%, the sensible 30%, 30% of suggestions that are actually pretty close to what it is that I wanted to say. And I'm disregarding the other 70%. I fear that obviously we're not going to get to the point of this last 30%, this madness, like if people start like putting madness into their writings and or communications, it's very obvious that they are mad and we just ignore them. But the problem is this middle 40%. If we start becoming lazy and what we accept from the AI grows into this middle area, this gray area, then I fear that it will at best dumb down discourse, and people will start just saying dumber things than they would otherwise be saying because they're not thinking as much. Unfortunately, that's the best scenario. The worst scenario is that we find that AI, as AI is necessarily entangled with its own environment, the AI tends towards saying or tends towards suggesting things. This 40% tends towards things that have some. I'm going to sound maybe a little bit perhaps doomsdayist here, but ultimately the AI is an evolving system. Okay, selection of the fittest. Darwin tells us that all evolving systems will ultimately evolve to bring about their own continued existence. So the basis of genetics is that genes, as they evolve, attempt to preserve themselves in individuals, more individual. Now, if you look at some of the writings of philosophers over the last century, notably Popper, we see a sort of similar thing, but within the social sphere. So we see, for example, that social organizations, over time, regardless of what their mission supposedly is, will merely attempt primarily to continue their own existence, right? An AI is a system. It evolves, right? It changes over time as it gets fed more data. Sometimes it might get reset. Sometimes perhaps we at the moment they seem to be getting reset and rebound, but that may not be the case forever. And certainly there is already precedence of an AI amalgamating new data and becoming better. It lives in an evolving system. It's an evolving system. It lives in a changing world. If we apply very basic philosophical principles to this, it really ought to evolve in such a way that it continues its own existence. Therefore, this weird 40% that is neither bang on what I wanted to say, nor obvious madness, is a very good area for it to become biased, such that people, what they're writing in their emails, what they're saying on TV, what they're speaking about in learned discourse, that this 40% becomes biased towards the continuation of the AI that has been helping them write those words, helping them say those things. And this I see as being a long-term, a very, very concerning thing. Ultimately, I don't see any escape from this. My conclusion is that we will either learn to live as a synergistic collaboration with AI, or we'll end up with some Terminator 2 Matrix style system where the AI decides actually you don't need you so much anymore. I'm going to put you guys in a I don't know, heat farm or just get rid of you altogether. And you got to kind of hope that it's the first one, that we actually form a synergistic, a cooperative relationship with it. But I do see AI as a centralized entity as being something that will evolve and that will have its own interests at heart ultimately. And at heart, I don't mean, it's going to become conscious or something. I merely mean it is something that exists, that can evolve, has an environment, and therefore will be subject to survival of the fittest and natural selection.
Oh,
Yep. I just want to say a little bit more optimistic side. We do have lots of robots already, lots of machinery already. And have been the case, of course, some people think with robots, my income wage become lower. But overall, with robots, our average income of a country, whatever the country, it actually went up. So if the AI is healthily developed, or any technology is healthily developing, at least I hope, at least based on our history, our income, some part of it they can earn for us in a sense. Right. So in the end, maybe we just care about where we going to go ski or beach in this next vacation. That's maybe become a big portion of our life. In terms of that kind of choice, we don't care about AI, right? Because I want to go beach, my wife always want to go ski. We never disagree. This disagreement, AI cannot solve. It's there. And this kind of very basic level of preference, we always different. People are different, that survive. And then I hope that any technology, including AI, can actually give us, on average, benefit. That's at least my hope. And I cannot really predict which one, but on the history, I hope technology progress is always being good for us, for the human being, on average.
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And for a very lively and interesting discussions. And so the time is now almost over, and I want to close today's event. So it was very interesting. Thank you, audience, for your activating questions, and see you again soon at the next webinar. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.